We are all about charity here at Sex and Space, and today's awesome guest shout-out is for the Cerebral Palsy Society of New Zealand, an organisation that strives to enhance the lives of people with cerebral palsy in Aotearoa by providing programs, support and advice. Their mission is enabling people with cerebral palsy to maximise their potential, and they value the diverse communities they are part of, and work with integrity alongside all people, supportive of their gender, sexual orientation, ethnicities and cultures. Check them out at cerebralpalsy.org.nz.
Sex, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the speculative interdimensional vehicle, Sex in Space. Its mission, to explore new points of view, to seek out fresh opinions, to boldly go where so many have gone before, and still somehow manage to totally miss the point. Subscribe to Sex in Space, wherever quality podcasts are found.
Hi, I'm Tim, and welcome back to Sex and Space, here continuing to explore sex across all of its infinite dimensions. Greetings from the first episode of Season 2. It's great to be back. We're coming at you from our brand new, but currently socially distanced recording studio. I'm here with fellow co-conspirator today, our researcher, Dr. Jane Charrington.
Hello.
Hello, Jane.
Hello. We are at least a metre apart.
We are at least a metre apart. We've decided to unshackle you and let you loose on some of our guests for this season.
Exciting.
Yep. If this is your first time joining us, then stick around. We've got some great content coming down the pipes in the next few episodes. We've got Dr. Jane Fleischman, or Dr. Jane versus Dr. Jane, as it's become...
We had a lovely time.
Yeah, as it's become known in-house. I sit down with the founders of Girls Get Off, and we talk about getting off. And Jane chats with the awesome Sonia Renee Taylor.
Amazing.
Just going to drop those names there to wet your whistle. Also, please do check out our back catalogue. We've had some great interviews with some awesome guests. Richie Hardcore, talking porn, masculinity and living your values. Robin Salisbury on her journey into sex therapy and getting stuck trying to say the word masturbate. Dame Catherine Healy, legendary sex worker and activist, and how she discovered lube for the first time. And Dolly and Emma from the School of Sexuality Education in the UK, talking porn, consent, sexting, healthy relationships, and crafting vulvas out of homemade Play-Doh. We love hearing from people who listen to the podcast. Feedback does mean the world to us. It probably does different things to us, to be fair, with Jane being a professional researcher and me just seeking cultural and social approval. But
researchers do that too, you know.
Okay, good. Be as honest as you want. Flick us an email at hello@sexandspace.com. We also have an always-on quick and easy survey, which you can find in the footer of our website at sexandspace.com or in the link tree in our Instagram over at sexandspace.com. That's sexandspace, DOTCOM. Dr. Jane, researcher Jane. Here's some research for us.
I do. It's about disability and sexuality,
Amazing.
Basically. 1 billion people in the world, that's about 15% of us, have some form of disability. And when you do the research and look at how things are working for people in that world, there's a shed load of stuff around how people are seen, how society looks at people with disabilities.
Yeah.
And doesn't recognise people as having a sense of sexuality. It tends to position them as asexual, or in some cases hypersexual, but more asexual, as in elides desires, overlooks the fact that there might be anything to discuss. So not only is there a gap in education, which there is, like the rest of us, except it's much bigger.
Yep.
You've also got people who aren't having conversations about their sexuality, even with those who care about them most sometimes, because it's just not considered as a thing.
Culturally, just not there.
And so one study that was done by some people we met found that over 50% of the physically disabled people they surveyed struggle to achieve sexual pleasure on their own. And the point of that is that there are a bunch of people who have a disability, that means they can't self-pleasure, can't masturbate, because they don't have hand dexterity or they don't have hand strength for whatever reason. They don't have the ability to achieve sexual release. So that's a even bigger gap. It's like layers of space here to address.
Yeah.
And incredibly, what they also found is that there were no products that had been specifically made to meet the needs of this community. And that, with that in mind, well, yes, but you know, in this amazingly technologically advanced world in which we live, when you've got people inventing things that you can experience sexual pleasure remotely through your computer, you'd think somebody might have had a little think here, because there's an awful lot of people we're talking about, and 90% of the people they surveyed said they wanted such a product.
Yeah.
So we found, and today talked to, the wonderful team that decided to do something about it.
Yeah. Yep, that's right. Heather Morrison and Andrew Gurza are the co-founders of Handi, Handi. Handi are literally making sex toys designed by and for disabled people. Handi was started with the belief that everyone should be able to get off, and they're on a mission to put sexual pleasure within everyone's reach. They unpack their fascinating origin story, their research, and their fantastic first cab-off-the-rank toy, the Handi Joystick. It's a great chat and an awesome way to kick off Season 2. Let's climb on in.
And now, the interview.
I'm going to jump right into a phrase that was used yesterday, because it seems to me to be an interesting kind of anchor point to explore from around your world and what you do. That working together apparently came about as the result of a frank conversation. And I was wondering if you remember that conversation and what triggered it and what set this journey together in motion.
Yeah, so Heather had seen a video that I had done, a documentary that I was in, and that was a light bulb moment for her to understand my experience of not being able to self-pleasure. And then I was in Australia visiting her, and we were on the beach having brother and sister time. We were just talking things through. And we were talking about my work in sex and disability and the work that I do. And the conversation continued, and she said, well, what kind of toys do they have for disabled people? Don't they have toys for you? And I kind of said, well, not really. None of the toys on the market work for me. And I explained that to be able to use a regular on the market toy involved dexterity. They had really small buttons. It was hard for me to use a toy like that. And I showed her my hand and said, look how hard it is for me to like hold something as simple as like, something small. So imagine trying to hold a toy in place to self-pleasure. It's just not something that I can do. And then so we kind of kept talking about it, and then very naively and playfully she was like, well, do you want to make one? And I remember being like, I don't know if I want to make a toy with my sister. But the more and more we talked about it, and we realized that it was something that would impact the world.
Yeah.
We went back home to our respective homes and did some research and found that 92% of the people that we interviewed or that we surveyed to see if a toy like this would be something they wanted, 92% said yes.
Wow.
So we realized that with numbers like that, it wasn't just about making a toy for Andrew to self-pleasure. It was actually something that could...
would have been probably a lot weirder.
Yeah. But still cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that, had you asked me 5 years ago, would I be making a sex toy with my sister? And I'm sure Heather can attest to the same. Would you be making a sex toy with your sibling? We both say, oh, no. But it's something that I think, because we're brother and sister, we can have really frank conversations about it that aren't weird, that aren't strange. I mean, we're so used to talking about it as a team now that both of us will just like, oh yeah, we do a brother and sister sex toy thing, and people are like, what? Whoa. But it's something that I think makes the brand even that more fun and even that more unique.
Yeah, and the name is great as a brand.
Yeah, we're quite pleased with it. It's an amalgamation. Well, it's two things. It's an amalgamation of our names because Heather and Andrew, so Handi, but also, and more importantly, it's a name that is taking back the word handicap, which once had and does still have kind of a negative connotation to it and a negative history. So we were like, well, let's play with that. Let's make it really playful. And because we're dealing in something also that, we're dealing with people with hand limitations, it really, the name carries a lot of weight within our community. And so we thought it was a fun and playful way to talk about what we're doing.
That's brilliant. In the timeline of your, coming together to decide to do this, when did the book come about?
The book came about last year, so we've probably been on the journey. We've been working on this for just a little over 2 years. We launched the brand last May, so May is International Masturbation Month. And so it's a really good marker for us to talk about stuff because it's a time when the world is finally starting to celebrate self-pleasure as part of holistic self-love. And it's also within that time when there's a big portion of the population who's being told to just, give yourself a hand, and literally hundreds of millions of people around the world are like, yeah, cool, we can't.
Yeah.
Good one. And so for us, it's a really good opportunity to bring that topic about. So we launched the brand in May. And we knew that we were probably going to be realistically not launching the toys for another year to a year and a half, which is a very long period of time to be telling people that you're working on something and keep people interested in growing the brand. And we also realized from doing so many conversations and like product conversations and just talking to the community just generally that there was a big need within the community to kind of have their experiences shared within the realm of sex and disability, and that not having that representation was actually causing quite a bit of like shame and isolation in the community itself, and also perpetuating this kind of separation from the rest of society and just general misperceptions within able-bodied people as well. And so I think everything we've done on this journey has been with some naivety. I think in order to be an entrepreneur, maybe that's part of what you need to have. But we said, there's so much conversation that needs a place to live. Maybe we should write a book. And it was really as not unconsidered, but it was just kind of, we should write a book. And then the more that we kind of dug into that, the more that we realized actually how important this book could be. And the more that we worked with the disabled community and the rest of the team at Handi to sort of pull it together, the more responsibility we all felt to actually do it justice, to bring it to life, because the stories that people were sharing with us and the artwork and the accounts that people were giving to us of their own lived experience was just so incredibly beautiful and raw and funny, and sometimes all of those things together, that we wanted to do it justice in bringing it to the world. But it was one of those things, where it was like, let's write a book. And then the more we got into it, the more we realized actually how important that project actually was.
I mean, I'll be honest, I'm about 2 hours in. I'm reading the ebook version. I'm a couple of hours in, and I don't know what I'm going through at the moment. Maybe I'm going through something, but I'm finding it really. It's like a roller coaster of emotions for me. It's brilliant. I'm really loving it. I found it just an amazing insight into what seems like a very such a human set of experiences, in a way, like identity, coming to terms with sexuality, your own sexual preferences, body image, and all of these kind of things, and the struggles that we all have with things like confidence, or
all of these things, and it's just to sort of to read it and to I don't know, even just take on board just some of the lessons for like myself as just the reader. It's just been like, wow, this is totally relevant for me and society more broadly.
Well, I mean, that's certainly the reaction that we wanted. We wanted non-disabled people to read the book, even if they had no experience of disability, to read the book and feel like it also was something for them. I mean, the goal of the book was really twofold. We wanted the disabled community to have a place where they could see their story told back to them, and those stories could live there, and it could be a resource for them to feel not so alone. But also we wanted to allow for the non-disabled community to read the book and to confront some of their own misconceptions around disability and some of their own ableism that they maybe didn't have words for or didn't know how to talk about, and look at it in a way that didn't say you should feel ashamed for not knowing, but say here's a resource for you to learn more from. So the fact that you're saying that it's eye-opening to you and it's something you've not considered, that's a good thing, because going forward now you'll have those stories and consider things a little bit differently. So we're excited because it totally met its target then.
Yeah. One of the things. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think like the other thing that was maybe an unintended consequence, but like we probably should have seen it coming, but maybe didn't, is that it's actually, no matter if you're disabled or able-bodied, it's incredibly relatable in so many ways. So I think that's also kind of one of the other things that you were sort of touching on there, is like, doesn't matter if you live with a disability or you currently don't, because we're all humans and we all go through very similar emotional experiences, particularly as it relates to love and lust and sexuality. Obviously, the disabled experience has its own like specificities within it, but at the same time, we're all human and we all have very similar emotional experiences. And so when I was reading, I was like, I could relate to so many things and so many struggles I'd had around body image or coming to terms with different like pieces of my own personality and identity. And I think like the more we realize that we're actually not all that different, whether one of us has a disability or not, the more close we can become as a society. And I don't think any of us were insightful enough to realize that that's also one of the outputs. But definitely reading it through, I was like, oh yeah, like this is also me.
And one of the things that sort of comes through what you just said before about, we're all the same. I guess at some levels, that truth of, am I normal? Am I okay? Comes through in so much of every topic we go through, everyone we talk to. But the other side of it is, of course, that we're not all the same. And so it's, you were mentioning when we talked before that it's a journey of discovery from your end too, with the people you've talked to. It'd be nice to hear how that felt to recognize such differences in the stories for yourself.
You, Andrew.
I think it, as somebody with certain disabilities, to read other stories of people with different disabilities and to understand that their experiences were different, but the feelings of shame, the feelings of wanting to be confident in your body, wanting to be sexy, wanting to be loved, wanting to be touched, wanting to access sexuality, those were very similar. So while the experiences of disability may have been vastly different, the desire for connection and to be able to feel sexy and to have lust and to have love all around disability was very much the same. So again, reading the stories of different disabilities was great because you got to learn something new about how disability and chronic pain affected somebody. But you also I saw touches of myself in the other storytellers, because I was like, oh yeah, I want that too. I want to feel connected. I want to be told that I'm sexy. I want to be told that my disability isn't a problem but is an asset. I want all those things. And so I think reading those stories was a great lesson in we can be different in some ways, but same in a lot of other ways too.
Yeah, it's it sounds like it's been quite a journey for you both through this process. Were you working in the space of sexuality before, Andrew, before you started this work?
Yeah, I've been working as a freelance disability consultant in specifically sexuality and queerness and disability for about just almost 10 years. So I finished school and I was like, oh, I need a job. I guess I better make my own. And I've been working kind of in this space as a freelance kind of speaker for the last, just about 10 years. So I have been, yeah.
And so that was an interesting job to make for yourself. What led you to that?
Well, I had finished school. I have a master's of legal studies from my college, and I had been looking for work, and I had been applying to government, looking for government jobs, something that was really stable, because as we know, disability is very expensive and being disabled is very expensive. So my mom and our family was like, well, you should get a good job because you have this education, and if you get a good job, you'll be secure. And every time I would apply to these jobs, I wouldn't get them, and I would go out for interviews and I wouldn't get them. And I had worked through college at a call center and doing like just a menial job just to make some money. And I found even that experience of being in the 9-to-5 world was very inaccessible with what my needs were. Just getting into work sometimes took 2.5 hours, and then sometimes I'd have to leave the job because I'd have to use the bathroom, and my disability device would malfunction, and I have to go home. So just trying to do an 8-hour shift was just becoming untenable. And so when I finished school, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to get a good paying job where I can be accommodated. And I went to a disability employment center here, and I said, I want to be a speaker. And they said, oh, that's a nice hobby. That's not a real job. Like, you can't be a disability speaker. That's not a job. And I basically was like, well, fuck you. I'm going to make it a job. And so I went on Vistaprint and put a card with my name on it and said I was a disability consultant, not having any idea what that was. And literally said, here's what I do now. Hire me. I guess this is what I do. And I just said, these are the things I want to talk about. And it kind of snowballed from there.
Brilliant. That's so baller. I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so what was your first gig?
I did a photo shoot for a gay magazine in Toronto called Fab. They wanted somebody to be their cover boy of the month or whatever. And so I wrote in and said, do you have anybody who is a wheelchair user? And they, of course, said no. And so I knew this. And so I was like, well, you should have me because you need diversity on your pages. And I totally milked that for all it was worth. And I had a photographer come over and do a photo shoot, and that went all over Toronto. And from that was kind of me kind of getting my feet wet. And then from there, I just cold emailed places like HuffPo and outlets saying, I have a story. I want to share this with you. Can I write some articles about being queer and disabled? And they paid nothing. They didn't pay anything, but it was a way for me to get my name out there and start seeing if this is what I wanted to do. And, those got a little bit of traction, and those got people on either side saying either they loved it or hated it. But at least then people knew that I was talking about queerness and disability in a way that I don't think anybody had really done before. I was very frank and very outspoken to in order to make a name for myself. And so from there, I just said, I want to talk to universities. I want to go to sex education conferences. I want to do all this. And I just put myself in a path to go. And eventually, because of the stuff I had done, it picked up, and that's what I've been doing for 10 years now.
So that's why when you Google his name, pretty much you'll find him with pictures of him in his leathers.
Yeah, I did find that, actually. That was a cool shot.
Yeah. Try to find one that's not.
And how did you feel when you first saw those pictures as sister?
Well, you didn't even tell me that you were. I don't even think you told me you were doing. I think I just saw the magazine one day and was
wow.
Oh my God. And then somebody at my work was like, is that your brother? And I was like, yeah. I don't think you actually mentioned that was happening, or if you did, you didn't make a big fuss about it, because I don't think you probably didn't realize how big it was going to go. But I think it ended up being, it was Now magazine, right?
Yeah.
it was one of the first times that the disabled body had been represented in that way, not just with some of their clothes off, but in leathers, like fully sexualized, not just like, oh, I've got my top off, but like actually in a way that was like really forcing people to reconsider their perceptions and like actually gaze on the disabled body with the perception of sexuality and sexiness. And I just thought like that was just so incredibly brave and amazing. And kind of hilarious because you're my brother. But it didn't weird me out. I just was like, wow, that's like really amazing. And I don't think any of us realized the impact it would have, or like the sort of catalyst that it was to the rest of your career and trajectory from there.
Yeah, I certainly didn't expect it to be what it was, and at that point, Heather and we had no plans to be doing what we're doing. So like, I wouldn't have been like, hey, look at this like sex thing I did, family. Like like people saw it, but again, I had no idea that it would go where it went. So yeah. But looking back on it, it totally makes sense now that we're doing this.
Yeah. Has it made you braver about your own sexuality?
Doing stuff like that and doing photo shoots like that. I mean, I'm shy. I'm as bold as I am kind of in the work I do. I am very shy. I'm very like awkward. Even though like my online persona, my public personas feel like, yeah, sex and disability is great. Like personally, I'm shy and I'm awkward. So like I think doing stuff like that does make me braver because it forces me to look at my own body and realize that I, for myself, I'm a sexual being and that I deserve to be in these spaces too. And so every time I do something like that, even though I'm totally shy and awkward during the whole process of it happening, like I remember doing that photo shoot and having to like stand there in my leathers with, you know, all these photographers and try to look sexy, but I was freaking out. But to know that it's going to have an impact and it's going to like, you know, it's going to go around the world like that and have people see me still. You can Google that photo and see me in my leathers like now. So like to know that it's going to do that and change the perception of disability around the world, like that's powerful. So it does make me very proud to be one of the first people to be as involved in terms of disability as I am, because you know medically I'm considered severely disabled, so I'm very, very, very disabled. So to be able to do that, to show off my sexuality in that way, as somebody who was told by the doctors, like, you know, you're just severely disabled, that's who you are, that's it. So to be able to like kind of give them the finger in that way, like, look what I'm doing now, like, look what I'm doing, I'm showing you all up and I'm awesome. So I think it does make me not braver, it makes me more confident in myself, I think.
That's very cool.
It is very cool.
Yeah. It seems like, as you say, you're at the forefront of this field with the work that you're doing, particularly working on making the sex toy together. I take it's singular because at one point it was prototypes plural, but there's now a singular toy coming out the other end.
Yeah, so the way that we've done it, we partnered with RMIT University in Melbourne initially. They did some additional research for us to further validate the need, but also start to create some concepts. Off the back of that, we had 4 lead concepts that we really, really loved. And that it could have gone in any direction. And so we then tested those concepts with occupational therapists as well as with the disabled community globally. So we did a bunch of focus groups and one-on-one interviews actually during lockdown the first time around to understand the pros and cons of each of the potential designs, which ones we thought were going to work the best, etc. And we got them in front of as many people as we could. And then from that, we distilled all of that feedback and we landed on one lead design. Like we knew we wouldn't be able to launch 4 designs at once. My head would have exploded. We'd have to pick one at least to have our lead. And so from there, we did have one lead design. We evolved that design further, continuing to sort of review with the community as well as our OTs. And then once we got that design evolved enough, we created really, really crude prototypes. So we created 10 prototypes, all of the same one. We sent that across to 10 people who volunteered to be testers around Australia. And they basically, over the course of about a month, tested it and then gave us feedback directly to me, directly to our design team, and we included the occupational therapists they were working with, or we were working with on those calls as well. So it was, again, just a really collaborative process, and really just pulling in everybody's different points of view, perspectives, and expertise. And that's kind of the way that we've done this. The whole every sort of step of the way is sort of testing and then creating and then validating as we kind of move forward towards one singular product and then launch. So we are now just finalizing the design of the first toy, and then we'll hit pre-sales within the next, aiming for September.
You mentioned that you learned a lot during the prototyping. And as somebody who does design work anyway in your day job, what did you find you learned particularly about prototyping in this process?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you get your designs and your stuff in front of the people who might be using it, you learn so much. It's so incredibly valuable. It's also incredibly nerve-wracking because you've put so much of yourself and so much time into this and you believe in it. And like, I'm always really, really nervous the first couple of testing calls that we go through, because like, what if everyone hates it? what if all the negatives? But actually, you want to uncover those negatives as much as you want to know why people love it. You want to know, what do you hate about it? What's not working for you? Because right now, and in that instance, we were at a point where we could do whatever we wanted to with the design. We hadn't invested so much money in tooling or products or anything that we couldn't fundamentally change it if we needed to. And so that was a big reason why we did the testing in the way that we did, and why we created such crude prototypes, to know that there might be some really fundamental things we need to shift here. And ultimately, there's no financial cost in us shifting any of those. Yes, we spent time on this, but so what? If it's not right, we can go back and change it. And so we learned a lot. Like, we always learn so much. There's a lot of things that people loved. So the device is kind of like if a body pillow and a foam roller had a love child. Like, it is quite large. It has a holster in the middle to be able to hold vibrators and sleeves. But it's also something that you hug into, because that means we're transferring the reliance from fine motor skills in your hands over to gross motor skills and other body parts to be able to position things, get things in control. And it's just a really natural, allows people to hug on to it and actually cuddle it. And that's a really natural movement for everybody, disabled people, able-bodied people, and also is a action that creates a lot of like emotional response in people from intimacy and positive feedback, and also helps to get people who might be in their heads about things. So one of the things we heard from quite a few people was that they really loved the huggable nature because it was comforting, it was increased intimacy, but also it kind of broke the negative cycle that was going on in their head that was creating anxiety. So if you've got hand limitations, or you're used to your hands kind of giving out or getting tired before you're able to orgasm or to feel pleasure, then what ends up happening is that during the act of trying to give yourself pleasure, you start to get in your head about whether or not you're actually going to be able to get where you're trying to go to, whether you're not going to be able to actually orgasm or just feel nice. And what we heard back, which was, I think, a really big, really important finding for us, was because of the way that people were able to just hug into it and kind of position it and then let the toy do the rest of the work and take their hands out of the equation. It broke that negative cycle of anxiety for people around worrying that maybe they were going to get tired, or the device would slip, or one way or another something was going to happen, or their disability was going to act up, that they weren't going to be able to orgasm or even just feel pleasure at all. Because they're so in their head. So that was an unexpected positive consequence of the design, which we didn't really see coming around that sort of anxiety cycle, but which was also, I think, really, really interesting. I think the other hypothesis or assumption that we went into this with, which was broken, which was really, actually really, really great, is that we kind of assumed, we had this assumption that we knew from prior testing that women preferred vibration over penetration. If you could provide penetration too, great, but ultimately vibration was more important. And for men, we had assumed that vibration was quite polarizing, because we talked to a lot of people about vibration and we found it to be quite polarizing. Like, some guys were really into it, some guys really weren't into it. And this round of testing actually debunked that assumption, in that the people who the guys who thought they were not into vibration actually hadn't tried vibration. Wow. And so it actually wasn't so much that it was polarizing. It was actually more like that they just hadn't actually tried that sensation before. So they didn't think that they would like it, which was a different finding to what we had before. So that actually opened us up to like reviewing what we offered, who we offered it to, and also understanding that while some guys really wanted a sleeve-like device, something that they could penetrate, it wasn't a must-have, and that vibration for a lot of guys was actually going to be better because not everybody can get an erection. And so if you're providing something for males which is only penetrative, then actually potentially leaving quite a few people out, even though all of our stuff will be quite gender fluid. I think that was a really big assumption that we had going into it, which was completely busted off the other side. So there are a few things like that, but those are the two that come to mind. And what was great was that we had the design teams on all of these calls, all of the feedback calls. And so you can tell a design team things time and time again from stuff that you've heard, and they're an amazing team, and they do listen, but it's way different than when you're sitting on a phone actually on an interview with somebody and you're actually listening to their voice and their emotion and their experience, telling you what's working, what's not working. And even afterwards, when we had our kind of regroup and huddle, the lead designer at Ver was like, oh my God, like, I know you've told us those things before. And he's like, and I'm so sorry that we didn't listen to you. And I was like, well, you did, but like, now you've heard it from the horse's mouth. Like now you understand why I kept banging on about that thing, because you've heard it as much as I have now. So it was just a really, I think, awesome experience. And just being able to have the design team and other people within the group on those calls, and hearing people's responses just gives you that much more understanding, makes the design stronger, gives you more empathy. And also gives you like so many different ideas as well, which is really cool. Like the design team's notepads at the end were absolutely filthy.
This feels like the start of a big kind of trajectory for you both. I think, as you said, you can't do them all at once now. You've got to start with one, but I suspect that there's an opportunity to expand significantly as you go forward.
We knew from like the beginning that we'd never be able to have one toy that hit everybody's like disability and also everybody's sexual preferences. Like both of those things are just such a massive range that trying to design for everything in one go would have been impossible. And so the plan is definitely to have a range of different toys, start to create new products off the back of them, and also look at how we can adapt small things or make things more accessible that we create, or even some of the things that are also already on the market. So there's I think a massive opportunity the more you dig into this space, to do things for this market that then benefit this community, but also benefit everybody else as well.
Completely.
Yeah. Have you discovered a new genre of sex toys as well, do you think, during this? I mean, I've heard a few interviews with people, disabled and otherwise, sort of on how the sex toys that are out there on the market existing can be used in like a variety of different ways, and people use them in different ways. And if it's like a internal G-spot stimulator, maybe they use that externally and different things. But it sounds like what you've hit upon is something I've never heard of before. This whole, comforting, emotional kind of thing sounds amazing. Sounds great. But do you think you've found a new genre of toy in a way?
I think we've definitely opened up the category of sex toys. Like I think Andrew coined this term, disability-driven design, and I think we definitely, the way that we approach our design is based around people with different disabilities who can't currently access their own sexuality or what's on the market. Whether everything ends up being including that sort of cuddly, huggable nature, I'm not sure yet. But it has had like really. We always knew it was cool, but I don't think any of us realized to what extent it had a positive effect.
Yeah. We did an episode of our Handicast, which is a podcast within the show that I produce, and so we did an episode with some of the testers last week, and they both said, having the ability to cuddle this toy lessened my anxiety, made me feel better, made me feel more connected to my body, made me feel more connected to my disability experience through pleasure. Like we did, and I think we sort of knew that that was our goal, but again, to hear it from the horse's mouth was like, oh wow, we've hit on something. Even in just the prototype, we've hit on something that is huge and is so much more an emotional experience than just get your random vibrator from the store. We've hit on something that is gonna open up conversation around how to have different types of sex, how to have sex that's about pleasure-based sexuality versus like gotta get off, gotta finish.
Yeah.
But it's more about the experience of getting there than I gotta get to the destination of being done. So I think just hearing that from our testers in hearing that from them as we were kind of doing it was like really impactful.
I think it's really nice too to open up that space for people listening around how much work goes into the design of such things. It's a year and a half you're saying so far?
It'd be more than over 2 years. So we had that original conversation over 2 years ago. And then we started down the road of research. And I think it's taken, we could have probably had a toy to market way faster, but we've been really deliberate in making sure that we are actually, the last thing I'd want to do is put a toy onto market that doesn't actually solve the need. And in order to make sure that it does solve the need, you need to do this design thinking process. You need to do testing, you need to get it in front of people, you need to take feedback on board, you need to do like the right research, and that just takes always way longer than you think it's going to, and just getting a physical product on board or into the world just takes way longer in general, I think. But then when you're actually trying to create something totally brand new that's never been designed for before, it just ends up taking even longer than that. And I think if you had told us what our toy would look like at the beginning of this, like neither one of us could have ever imagined this is what it would look like. It's so completely different to anything that's that exists. And if you saw it in somebody's bedroom, you would definitely not be like, oh, that's a sex toy. You'd be like, oh, that's like a weird like foam roller or some sort of like weird accessible mobility aid,
therapy device or something.
Yeah. It doesn't look, or like a cuddle pillow. It doesn't look like a sex toy in any way. And so when you see other companies creating toys, they can get them to market really quickly, because I think if you look back and even some of the pictures you sent through in preparation for this podcast like show some of the older like sex toys from back in the day, like from like eons ago, and they don't look that different to the toys that are currently on the market. So there's not a lot of innovation in this space. It's starting to become more innovative, but generally it's been sort of a quick money maker on renovation and just sort of like really cheap,
adaptable versus like creation.
Yeah.
So what they'll do is they'll take a vibrator and they'll put a strap on it, or they'll make it so that one type of disability, one type of hand limitation could use it, or one type of person with a disability could use the toy. And they'll take the same idea of penetrative toy and say, oh yeah, this is for all bodies or for everyone. But there's no, like Heather was saying, there's no innovation, there's no discussion of disability from ideation through to creation. And so what Heather was saying earlier about, the term we coined, which is disability driven design, which is really having disabled people from the beginning of the idea all the way through to bringing it to market. And so that's why I think what we're doing is different, because from the beginning of Heather and I sitting down and having the idea, we've had hours of phone calls of like, okay, so how do your hands work? Like how would this work for you? How do you think the toy should look? And, getting the input of not just me, other team members with disabilities and testers with disabilities to make sure that it's something that could actually be used by this community, and to show that all the way through, disability is at the forefront of what we're doing.
Again, it's breathtakingly cool.
Yeah.
Is there anybody out there that you've come across in the world doing anything similar in your research?
Yeah, so there when we first started, there was like a black hole of like basically nobody. There is a company out of the UK called Octopus, and they've got sort of pulse duo and some really cool like Tektronic technology that allows the toy itself to move in an up and down motion. And I think it was designed originally around people with spinal cord injuries to help increase sensation and movement for them. But what we found in talking to other people with disabilities is that unfortunately didn't really overcome a lot of the barriers that were existing for people. So it still relied on a fairly significant amount of dexterity and hand mobility and movement. And actually, a lot of people felt couldn't actually like get it out of the packaging. I think Andrew, you were one of them, let alone get it on them. And so it's a really cool device, but it didn't quite unlock the barriers that we were working on or we had identified. Since then, and more recently, there's a company that I believe is in Melbourne called XES Products, and they are also working on something. I think they've actually, well, I know that they have just released what theirs will look like because I just got an email from them this morning. So there are other people who are starting to work on it. We're sprinting to be first to market. But ultimately, like when you look at the fact that there are so many people with this need in the market, like competition is not a bad thing. And there's definitely a room for, more than one company that's focusing on this.
For sure.
Yeah.
One of the things we talked about yesterday was wanting to create the light bulb moment through these conversations for people to go, oh. And one of the things that was in my head when you were talking before is how hard it is to be a teenager and to try to explore sexuality. And then how tricky this space is for parents of those teenagers with disability to consider how they might support that. And this feels like a really important idea to take into that space for consideration. The work you're doing and the way you're doing it, and also possibly for parents, the non-threatening nature of something that doesn't look overtly like a sex toy, that isn't the heteronormative, penetrative kind of like, right, we're into it, but is actually about self-pleasure and vibration on the body and orgasm as part of learning and discovery. I guess I'm sort of saying all of that and wondering, Andrew, what your thoughts are for parents who are wrestling with how to even start conversations with their teenagers.
Oh, do we have like 5 more hours to have that?
Go back.
Unfortunately, there's not a lot of education for sex education for disabled teenagers or their parents, because the only way we tend to talk about sexuality and disability, if we do sex education around sex and disability, is through risk. So all the parents will hear is, if your child has an intellectual disability or physical disability, they're at a higher propensity to be abused, which is true, and those numbers are true. But unfortunately, there's nothing really out there led by disabled people that says you can have great sex as a disabled person or a disabled teenager and have pleasure. And I think parents need to, I think my mom and our mom was different in the sense that she was very gung-ho. Her and I talk a lot about sex and disability, and a lot of her and I are very open. So our mom is, I think, a different case. She's very, very free with those conversations. But I think for the average parent with a disabled kid, I think it starts with even before they become a teenager. So many disabled children are touched by doctors and medical professionals and OTs and PTs, just touched automatically because they need assistance, and they're touched without being asked, do you want to be touched? Is it okay for me to touch you now? So even before we get into the sexual part, asking young disabled kids, hey, this doctor is going to touch you. This PT is going to touch you. Are you okay with that? How do you feel about that? Is it all right? Starting with those conversations first, or mommy and daddy have to touch you to help you do care. Starting with consent from a really young age and getting them to understand that they need the help and it's okay, but being given the opportunity to be asked, I think, is where we start before we get into how do we talk to our disabled teenager about sex. When I was coming out of the closet at 16, I remember my mom saying to me after I came out, she said, I'm really glad you told me. It's no problem. We love you. It's great. But then she also said, it is going to be harder for you because of your disabilities. I remember her saying this to me, and she hasn't been wrong. It has been harder because of my disability and because of the way people treat disabled people trying to be sexual. So I think parents also having frank conversations with their disabled teenagers about how their disability will impact them in adulthood, and not just having the run-of-the-mill birds and the bees, here's how sex is going to work, best of luck to you, but having conversations about, here's how your disability might impact this, or did you have any questions about how your disability will play a role in this? And unfortunately, there are not many resources for parents of disabled kids to have that. So the hope is with Handi, we can build an educational piece where we can also talk about those things for parents and for disabled youth to have more resources.
I definitely feel another book coming on.
Yeah.
Like 100%. Yeah, it's such a gap.
Yeah, and we realized like the first book kind of touches on that as well. And like a lot of, we know that parents have purchased the book for their kids, or even some of the kids sort of, or early teens sort of asking about the book. And it gives sort of a nice insight for parents to read, to help them navigate some of those conversations and give them a slightly different understanding of what their kids might be going through. And it also gives kids a sense of, I'm not alone in this, because one of the other things we found talking to a lot of people over the last few years is that unfortunately many people with disabilities are both systemically and culturally basically told that from a very early age that they shouldn't be, that they're not sexual, that they're non-sexual or asexual, or you're disabled, you don't need to be in sex ed, and a lot of times because sex ed is taught as a portion of physical education, systemically you're kind of removed from even having the choice of whether or not you want to participate in not that anybody's sex ed in school was like all that mind-blowing. I think we all sat through the banana and the condom demonstration, but I think it even if it's not really all that, even if everyone's jumping online to Google their own stuff later on, I think just being included within that it represents a much bigger factor, and says something to you whether or not it's like, basically if you're excluded from that conversation, but you're also at the same time having sexual feelings, then that starts to where that rift starts to come in, of feelings of like uncertainty and shame of your own sexuality. And you're telling me I shouldn't be sexual because I'm disabled, but like I'm waking up every night with wet dreams, so like which one is it? It's quite confusing. And so like the more we talk to people, the more we also recognize that within the sex ed perspective, there's a ton of content and work that needs to be done for all parties.
Yeah. I mean, it's not as if it's an easy or straightforward subject anywhere. There's multiple layers. And if you insert disability in there as well, it's, I imagine parents would find it quite daunting.
Oh yeah, I think also there are groups of people in society we look at and treat as if they were not sexual. I was talking yesterday about some work with people in elder care in res homes, and the fact that the work, a lady we spoke to, Jane, she was amazing, and part of her job is first to remind people running rest homes that their residents are either having sex, thinking about having sex, or not for some, but for most they are. And a policy around that might be quite helpful, because nobody's even had the conversation. And, so there are whole swathes of society for whom we haven't even started. So I think this is a really beautiful place to start, directly in that space of pleasure. And I love what you said, Andrew, sense education.
Oh no, I said sex, but I like that. We can say that I said it.
I thought I heard sense education. I thought that was a beautiful term.
We can totally attribute that to me. I'm happy to
talk it up on your own. Yeah.
Well, I think for young children, sense education as part of sex education, and what you're talking about in terms of what feels good to me and is this okay with me, yeah, it feels like a good place to start and a good call out.
Yeah, because I remember being a disabled child and going to multiple PTs and OTs and doctors and just letting them touch me because they were the authority figure and they were the doctor that was going to make whatever I was there for better. So we didn't even think about, there was no question of consent because we just let them. But I think in the world we live in now, just asking your disabled child, do you feel okay with this? I mean, and I always did, like everything was fine. But I think giving the child the option to say, I don't want to do this right this second. Give me, 5 minutes to relax, to get comfortable with the idea of the stranger touching me. Because I think so many disabled people, when they enter the medical system or the PT system or the OT system, even as adults, because we've been touched as children without being asked, we just assume that it's okay and whatever they do is okay. And then, something dangerous can happen where they can drop us or do something wrong to us that doesn't feel super great. And then we're left dealing with it. So I think talking to your disabled kid about what feels good will give them a healthy start in adulthood. When they start exploring their sexuality and start being sexual, they'll know right off the bat what consent is because they've been doing it since they were young.
It's a massive topic. I think the meta topic across it all is communication, and it's not something we're great at. Learning about how to describe pleasure, to ask for pleasure, to say if something's working or not, that's a human issue as well. I think that's part of the human condition for most of us.
Yeah.
And try to find ways to talk to each other. It's part of the gig.
Yeah, completely. I think communication, we're all of us, whether we're disabled or not, we're pretty shit at it. So we have to do better. And I think one of the powerful things about being disabled is being disabled forces you to have really intimate conversations with people really fast about your body, about your needs, I think disabled people are the leaders in that aspect of communicating, because we know how to do it every day in terms of care, in terms of our needs, in terms of all those things. We know how to be very direct about what our needs are, but it can be different when you're disabled and trying to access sexuality, because you want to be sexy, you want to be cool, you want to be viable, and to be super communicative sometimes isn't how hot sexuality is portrayed. So it can be hard for us to be able to communicate, because we want to emulate what we're seeing on screen, what we're seeing in movies, what we're seeing on TV, which is able-bodied people not talking and having great sex.
Well, they're probably not having great sex if they're not talking.
That's true. Nicely
Really good at acting.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, this is great.
Thank you so much. We look forward to talking again.
Thank you. Yeah. It was such a pleasure, and we'd love to. And if ever you want us back, we'll be happy to come.
Lovely.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Nice to see you.
Okay, thanks, guys. See ya. Yeah.
Really hope you enjoyed that interview as much as we did. If you want to check out more of Handi, you can head on over to thatshandi.co. That's thatshandi.co. There you can register for their newsletter, where you'll get updates about the toy, and you can also buy their amazing book, The Handi Book of Love, Lust and Disability. They're also on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. Just check out That's Handi. If you want to follow more of Andrew himself, you can check out his website, andrewgurza.com. That's Gurza, Gurza. He's Andrew Gurza _ on all his social channels, and he also has an award-winning podcast of his own called Disability After Dark. It recently won gold in the Outstanding Adult Series at the Canadian Podcast Awards, so give it a listen. Once you've finished doing all of that, and if you so desire, you can head on over to our Instagram or Facebook at sexandspace.com. That's sexandspace.com, and flick us a follow. We'll not only let you know when our new pods are dropping, but we'll be treating you to some video clips and bonus content from our interviews too. Many, many thanks to Heather and Andrew for this one, to my co-host Jane, and to the wider String Theory team, and of course to you guys for making it all the way to the end. See you for the next one. Bye.
If you found some of this material a little challenging, keep coming back and we'll make it really challenging.